I think everyone enjoyed that session because everyone was extra social in the afternoon tea break, which is great. So we're building more community now. So Ben and I will be moderating this session, and what we'd like to do is call the people down from each of the four breakout groups to give quick 5-minute lightning talks, and then we'll have a general discussion after that. We'd also like to set aside some time where we'll specifically call on the early career researchers who are here today to voice any of their opinions that they would like to share with the group. And then finally, we're also going to get the lead, so the people that put together the original proposal for this conference. We'll get them up, so Tim, Ben, Leslie. Is Leslie here? Yep. Oh, great. Hello. Beryl and Andy. We'll get them to come up and then we can have another kind of discussion, but focused on what their initial vision was for the conference and steps forward. Can I have, who wants to go first with the presentations or the 5-minute talks? Anyone? Sarah? Yes. Do you want me to wheel this over?
No, it's okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sarah can handle anything. Yeah.
Okay.
So who's next? Voon. Yeah, Voon can be next.
So, hello everyone. I want to thank everyone who contributed to the points that I'm going to read. And I also wanted to say that it is wonderful to have this space to finally talk about all the things that we have been complaining about for so many years and turn it into something positive. So for point number 1, so we discussed that we need collective uptake of data. We also need to build community, as in like a scientific community that is that champions each other. Then we need to build indigenous capability and capacity building. We also need support and growth and retention of ECRs. And in terms of science, like the opportunities that, that we can focus on will be like case study-driven approaches. So for example, identifying the drivers and the key problems and having, for example, a coastal study that can bring all the spheres together. In terms of point number 2, so what's the tiny difference that we can make so that the Earth community transcends? So there are 4 points. So one is compliance. So again, we need common standards between the different spheres. One important point is that we need a coherent document from this white paper. This is a great opportunity to release all our thoughts in a coherent way to the entire community. So we need to be compliant with this paper. Then we also want knowledge and the sharing of knowledge and experience. So again, like that spans the whole spectrum, right? So sharing cookbooks of workflows and doing hackathons and things like that. Then we also need to create a high impact communication message to the public, such as, for example, the talk that we listened to, the NASA talk given yesterday. So like how it integrates everything, and we want that message to have impact on the public, right? Like why all the science that we do matters. And then, so the 4th point is understanding and addressing the gap and lack of indigenous people in earth sciences. And when I mean earth sciences, is like understanding the earth. And we need to, again, acknowledge how much how wise they are. Point number 3, the sticking points. So we have 4 sticking points. So one is silos. We are all sick of silos. Not just within the spheres, but also, for example, in institutions, in universities, in government organizations, you name it, right? So it's across the board where we see those silos. Then we also want the people to be recognized. So for example, we want to retain that digital expertise. We want we want the people to be championed. We want initiatives where we can lobby and market what we do. And then also, of course, one very important point is that we need to, again, champion the ECRs, or like early and mid-career researchers. One of the big points is, the lack of long-term funding. We are not returning all that knowledge, and so we need to address that. And so then the second point is funding. And then within that, for example, is, okay, we have just so much diversity of needs, so how do we focus the funding? And we also need to acknowledge the cost of storage of all the data. Like we have been talking about data a lot. So who is going to pay for that storage and data analysis? And then I guess that flows into the fourth point, which is, again, data. So I'm going to, I guess, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to go into the fourth point, which is, where is the data? So we need to acknowledge that there is a diversity of data, and we have lots of it, right? So how do we address that? Then there is the lack of data standards. There is also, what are we going to do with the legacy data? Do we just store it, put it, take it from people's hard drives and put it somewhere, and then we figure out what the standards are. And then the last but not least point is the ethics around releasing data. So for example, that's going to be very important in the future for example, insurance companies who have access to that data, and then they do predictions on that, with that data. So how do we deal with that? And those are the points that I wanted to discuss.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, that was great. Voon.
Thanks for the opportunity, and there was really lots of discussion. If you have noticed the post-its at the break room, there were lots of points, but I've summarized it into three pieces of post-it, which means a lot of points doesn't get covered. My apologies for that, but then we sort of summarized it into three key points, which I will say spell it out now. So the first thing is, we all recognize that interdisciplinary collaboration is hard. Second, data management is costly, and there is a lack of incentive for researchers or agencies who collect data or generate models. And then lastly, there are general technical challenges in integrating data and model from cross spheres. So coming back to the first point, interdisciplinary collaboration is hard. So some of the sticky points that was raised in the group was including sort of just not aware of the application of each other's work to other disciplines. Second, different spheres don't really talk to each other. There was just too much information to digest. Even we have weekly newsletters of some sort. Different spheres speaks different language. But then we thought of some just concrete ways that might be able to push this collaboration, just make it a bit easier. So one of them was just showcase really good examples of success stories of integrated Earth research that gives inspiration for people to participate in interdisciplinary collaboration. Second is to create opportunity for networking. So some of the small ideas small ways to can get it work is during scientific conferences, encourage more multidisciplinary sessions. For groups that are in big centers, like for example, ARC, COE, have funding incentives to host multidisciplinary sessions as well. So that's the first point. Second point, on data, creating incentive for data management. Some of the sticky points is that a lot of these short-term funding, so it's very hard to plan things for long-term. Second is it's a pretty specific example, but then for researchers that's generating data, it's very hard to attribute costs to how much cost do we put in when we apply for funding. So some of the one concrete ways of thinking how to move forward is if there is a bit of guidance for researchers or people who are applying for funding, how do we attribute costs so that we are including these in our grant application, that would be great. Last point on sort of just technical challenges. So we sort of put it under this umbrella of data harmonization is just generally quite tricky. So there's understanding what each data does, there's understanding the uncertainty in it, and also just trying to get these data to crosstalk, so making it interoperable, formatting and whatnot. So some of the sort of focuses that we think needs to be on is sort of really encourage data to be discovered on databases, making data more accessible, and also for different data management to avoid duplicated efforts. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Voon. Sam, are you? Oh, Hamish is doing it. Hamish, are you ready to come up, Hamish? Yeah. Great. Great.
About integration, isn't it?
It is. We can all do it
Together.
Yes, it's true.
Sharing,
It's
learning,
caring.
the whole thing. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Beck. That was a really great activity. Actually, we had a lot of conversation, and 3 o'clock hit the 3 o'clock hit the dot, and Beryl was at the door trying to get us out. So that's how fun it was actually between our group and our room, which was the Becker room, just in case there's superfluous information. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we had a really good discussion actually within the group, and loosely we broke it down into what is the ambition and aspiration that we want to achieve, what are some of the resources that we actually want to get it put in place at this kind of moment, and the green was for, what was that again? And for infrastructure that was required to actually support this, so yes. Excellent. So the team really talked about, and the group really kind of talked about setting some ambitious goals and some ambitious agendas and moonshots that we could all actually put our badge to over a 5-year period, which actually required all our spheres and all our areas to actually kind of come together, where we could see that we've got the building blocks, but what is actually required to get those building blocks into a place that we can come together. We talked a little bit about in that aspiration about having a digital twin for the environment in a particular region, which actually forced us to come together, look at those cumulative impacts and address some of those science priorities in a particular area. We also talked about the advent of new technologies and wanting to get rid of that data management and metadata management challenge. The advent of large language models, and could we have a large language model for the environment that actually helped us facilitate the ability to extract the information from that data, but also to integrate that data between our particular lenses and our particular spheres. We also talked in that ambition about having the one place for us to see what data is available across all our domains and across all our spheres, and to make sure that it's persistent and enduring in terms of its funding as well as in its operations. So how can we get that into the one place so we don't have to actually kind of search everywhere for this kind of data and see whether it's available? In that infrastructure piece as well, there was a strong conversation about setting up how good, I'll just quote it, how good are Jupyter notebooks and how excellent are they, and actually explaining how data integration comes together, how those modeling and analytics are actually performed, and helps out with reproducibility. So can we have some infrastructure in place there that allows us to publish those models against the sphere? Where are those models actually kind of run, or where can I run those models, and have that actually kind of captured for groups to actually build across? AJ really kind of talked about taking that concept further and having a bit of a help desk where we've got nodes of people that maintain and professionally manage some of those reference models for those communities, and that you could then get that extra support when needed. So that was a really fantastic idea.
No, you're doing very well.
Oh, thank you. This is the support that we need, eh? Just also in terms of some of those kind of priorities that less longer term aspirational, there was a general consensus that bringing us all here together was a very, very beneficial exercise, and can we have a conference every year also that is associated with that? And to back that up, and I don't know if Beryl has actually just seeded this idea, but to have a conference and have a journal associated with that as well. So we all own that, own that kind of concept. Are we missing anything?
Ongoing funding. I guess we talked a little bit about the precarity of funding rounds and grappling with that, and coming together under a single kind of unified banner within the integration space. Coming back to that question of why are we integrating? I mean, we bounce that question around a fair bit, and there's this kind of tension between the science question, or the why, and the infrastructure question. And some of us are saying, well, we need to ask the question to figure out, how we integrate. And the other half of the room said, well, we can't integrate until we've got the infrastructure. So, figuring out how that works at the same time, I think, along the same lines. So, yeah, I think that was the key. But otherwise, you absolutely smashed it, Hamish. I'd love to see it.
Oh, thank you very much, actually. But, it's really a collaborative effort of the team and the Becker room as a whole. So, thank you.
Shout out to the Becker room.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, they were great. They sat around the table very professionally and everything. It was good. And Donald.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much to the group that met with me in a room. I don't know what the room was called, but we met there. Sorry? Thank you. Sorry, it's Dorothy Hill room. I've boiled down the things we talked about, particularly on the first three questions, because we felt your spreadsheets will capture everything on the fourth. But there's still a lot of things we talked about, a lot of things that people noted down that I won't touch on. So I hope any of those come up in the subsequent discussion. So for the opportunities, one of the things that we focused quite a bit on was the need for some good exemplar use cases, things like CoastRI or some of the regional net zero strategy activities as opportunities, not just to do some real interdisciplinary data integration and science, but also to help us to flush out the challenges and learn how we do these things better, what are the best practices we need to take on board, how do we change the other things we're doing, etc. Several members of the group also identified in various ways that we should be making more use of opportunities to communicate the value of integrative and interdisciplinary activities. Just how significant some of the things we've been talking about over the last few days are to a sustainable and bright future for Australia and for the planet as a whole. Other opportunities were really more on the software data side, one of which was, and I suppose the surrounding practices, common approaches to getting data out to users who are not necessarily part of our inner communities, so translation activities. How do we do that in an effective way? And that this may be an area where there is real opportunity for more of a collaborative approach rather than each of us individually setting about that. And then at the opposite end of the data pipeline, dirt to desktop tools, focusing on how we simplify all of the stages of data collection, early capture, hopefully largely automated, of relevant metadata, packaging it up appropriately so that as far as possible, the entire data life cycle is streamlined and low energy. For quick wins, we wrote lots of things down and then agreed that none of them were exactly quick or teeny tiny. The closest we had, other than another emphasis again on common pipelines and workflows for data science. There's real opportunities, I think, for us to be thinking about capturing metadata and defining the structures and vocabularies that will be used in a study at the earliest stage as a way not only to simplify the life of the researcher when they get to the end and realize that they should have organized their data and written some metadata, but also to ensure genuine fairness for the data coming out of these processes. I think a lot could be done, a lot of fairly generic work could be put in place that would help all of us and all of our researchers across all domains. We also talked about a data journal, or at least about encouraging good examples of data papers to highlight some of the more exciting and valuable data resources that are getting produced out of our activities. We had a bit of discussion as to whether we wanted to advocate for a new journal to do this for Australian data sets, but there was quite a strong feeling that there are good channels for these, and we just need the support from NCRIS and from the collaboration of the NRIs to prioritize getting more good outputs of that form. And there were also comments on the fact that data needs more visibility, needs more credit, because it's still the journal articles that get all the love. And we also talked about whether we wanted to have at least one more of these conferences or some regular workshops or other channels for continuing the communication. There are already quite a few ongoing regular monthly, bi-monthly meetings on data issues. So we don't want to replicate those, but one suggestion would be that maybe something more along the lines of an ECR forum that could be providing recommendations to the NRIs on ways that the lives of researchers could be improved, so that we can actually listen to actual hands-on experiences. Lastly, a few sticking points. Too much of the data curation happens late, but that's really the flip side of what I was talking about just now with better tooling early. Our data is siloed in all kinds of ways, but I mean that's obvious to us all. Private and academic data sets in particular, there's a lot of challenges around how we bring those together. But I think the main conversation we actually had in this area was more around what I would say was a lack of some of the key strategic governance components in everything we're doing. I fully agree with Rosie that we have every reason to be grateful for the stability that NCRIS has brought, but it still doesn't have lasting legal status. That we're building infrastructures that we believe are valuable not only for our researchers and for the sustainable preservation of our data and scientific products, but also ones that are key to Australia's future. And yet, I don't think the rest of society, those who fund us, see us in quite that light. They don't see us as infrastructure like the Bureau or ABS, essential to a data-driven future. And so it would be, I suppose, that one of the challenges is how we raise our profile in that regard. And another aspect of this overall governance is that we encourage and we require, or no, not require, but our goal is to get researchers to rely on our platforms and our repositories for publishing and sharing their data. And yet the history of even the last quarter century is one of repositories that really are useful for a few years to researchers and where a lot of effort goes into developing some data set, but where a few years later, nobody can maintain it and it's gone. And so for our activities, particularly as research infrastructures, I think we need to be thinking about the governance aspects of how we handle the life cycle of our activities, the life cycle of the services we deliver, looking at certifications like Core Trust Seal, and all the things that they encourage us to look at in terms of what happens if our own funding disappears, what happens to these data, do we have guarantees for these things? Okay, thanks.
Oh, great, thank you. I'll turn that off because I'm standing here. Yeah, thank you very much for the 4 speakers and for all the breakout groups. We'd like to have, just a facilitated, moderated discussion about what we just heard. Perhaps in the first instance, if there's some common themes that we heard across the 4 groups, etc. I might grab Ben. We'll need to run around and comment, so we can both do that. We don't need to be up here. Does anyone have? Oh, comments at the back?
Yeah, why not? And I can probably do this loud enough.
Oh, we've got recordings, so. Oh, thanks, Ben. I'll do the next one.
By the way, it's way more comfortable to sit up on this armrest. Just for anyone who's struggling with the seats. One of the recurring themes that came out, I guess, was talking about having a conference to integrate people across all the spheres. So we went through a process at the University of Wollongong where they forced a bunch of us together into a new entity, and we're from maybe not quite so disparate themes, but reasonably disparate themes, and no one sort of knew what anyone else did. So I would advocate for a session in such a conference where people just get up and explain basically what data they collect, what it's used for. A bit like Dahlia's talk yesterday, they went through a whole lot of different stuff that was going on that NASA and other people were doing, so that we can get a feel for what other people can offer and then give us a way to think that we might be able to find common themes and things that we can work on. So I just wanted to throw that out.
All right, thank you. Follow-on comments? Wow. Do you want to take the floor for a little bit, Ben?
Take the floor. Take the floor.
It's your own fault.
We'll come back to some of these ideas about how to get communication going. What I did want to do, we'd had a lot of discussion about Indigenous activities before, and they're actually forming a little bit of a group, I think, having more discussions, and some of the people I think have left. One, we had ECRs talking, particularly yesterday, on their perspectives, which was great, and I think a lot of people found that useful. I did just ask some of our ECRs if they wouldn't mind speaking from the floor on, things that they found are important, even if it just amplifies points from before, because really a lot of this infrastructure we're putting in is really the long-term gain that ECRs are going to benefit from, but hearing what the issues are now would be very helpful, I think. So if we're any of the ECRs willing to speak to those sort of topics.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Jess. I'm from Geoscience Australia. Couple of notes, but first of all, how many ECRs do we have in the room? And when I say ECR, I'm referring to, say, early career researcher. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a researcher, though, so maybe a different term could be used as well. And it's usually someone between, say, is it 0 and 5 years after your technical training?
Oh, we're talking
10.
But we're talking
now.
about 10.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic, so that's really good. So how many have we got?
Lots.
Yeah, heaps. Yeah, and were you saying medium career researchers as well? So quite a few. So yeah, I think when it comes to early career researchers, I think we have a bit of a leaky pipeline. And I think this is a type of term that's usually used for, say, talking about people, gendered loss in sciences, for example. So, you know, we lose women through the pipeline, we lose people of, you know, different minorities within gender in the pipeline as well. So I think let me just, hang on, just got some notes here. So I think one of the most difficult things is quite short-term contracts. And I think this is what a few of us have been speaking about quite a lot. And it's difficult to progress your career when you are on these, say, you know, 2 years, 3 years contracts. And we were speaking in our group about people who are not necessarily scientists but work in data, and they have contracts that are that can be as little as 1 year, even 3 months, I think Leslie was saying. So I think that makes it really difficult to say, build careers. And then when you have these, I guess you need to rapidly produce products, and maybe that's, say, papers, for example, then your curation of that data is maybe not up to standard, and certainly not maybe integrated into the best way. And so maybe this is just maybe more specific to academia and maybe not other places as well. But I guess I'm not really providing a solution to this issue other than, like, I'd love to see, an extension of potential contracts and security for ECRs. But I'd love to hear the perspectives of others as well in the audience.
Yeah, there's Megan at the back too. Yeah, thank you, Jess. Yeah, very relevant.
Yes, sorry, I don't know if I have a solution either, but I'm employed as an academic working on data services mostly at the moment. I'm on the Australian National Soil Information System. We have the challenge of where you need short-term contract performance reviews. You're measured on outputs. Outputs are only measured as academic peer review publications. So when you're producing things like vocabularies, data services, software, data sets, they're not necessarily recognised as peer reviewed, and they don't have the same weight as publications. So it's quite a challenging work environment. So I think if we can recognise data sets, products as, what do you call them? First citizens, what's the term for it? First class research outputs. I think that would really encourage researchers to publish their data sets, because all the researchers I talk to or interview say, well, they're not incentivised, they don't have the money or the time, and their institutes don't see it as an output.
Thank you. Sorry, there's one just right, you don't have to run, Ben. It's okay. We've got 2 mics.
Kind of building and emphasising on that point, I kind of got into a bit of a precarious position in my PhD where I did put a lot of effort into curation and reformatting of legacy data, and made it a whole chapter in my PhD only to have my supervisors turn around and say, oh, it doesn't count. So I have to do 3 data chapters on top of that. And I think allowing the assessment and the definition of what a PhD is in integrated earth science to evolve with our challenges, so that this kind of work is more supported, and actually, a first-class research output would be very beneficial, rather than, forcing your PhD candidates to do extra work to make the mile.
I think we should take that one step further and say that publishing usable code is way better than publishing in Nature. Like, how many articles have you read in Nature that say, oh, my lab did this awesome thing that now you can't do because you don't have the money for the research or the code or the field site? That's a useless paper. That just makes us feel bad that we don't have enough funding. If you go to the code and it says, here's the code on Colab and you can run it and now you have the capability I just made, I would argue that is a vastly more important output, particularly when we're dealing with things like climate change, where that code actually makes the world better and the other one makes people not able to solve the problems we need to.
Way beyond
So one thing that we have in common, whether you're an ECR person or you're later in your career path, is you've all been an ECR at some point in time. And as you go along, you're responsible and you feel the weight of those people underneath, especially if you're responsible for, strategic direction and clearing pathways and making things work. And to paraphrase Brian Schmidt, as he came into being the Vice Chancellor, he said the one advice he got is you spend a lot of time talking about parking. Those of us in these other roles, you spend a lot of time trying to get HR sorted out and trying to get employment and pathways and clearing barriers and whatever. And it was one of those things I was talking about, the ambition sort of side. There's big science ambition, but there's ambition for the individual researchers because you haven't got time to muck around, and if the infrastructure's flaky, your funding is one component, but if the vision is not there, if it's sort of flapping all over the place, you really can get stranded. And your supervisory chain for the ECRs are important on this because they're going to try and steer you into safe territory, as well. But you're also smart people on the next generation and will have vision about doing certain things. And, it's new research. You're at the frontier, trying to work things out. And the infrastructure is trying to push along to provide that opportunity as well. So, that is the intellectual challenge environment that we, from the infrastructure point of view, and the ECRs and those responsible for supporting that next generation of research. Anyway, that's a comment, obviously.
I'm now allowed to talk because you've spoken, so
yes,
I'm no longer
you.
in
Good.
ECR front. So one thing, of course, clear that it's all about impact, and so I think we can think about, how data and data curation or code availability and model availability, how that's actually more impact than indeed that Nature paper, right? Because whether that Nature paper gets cited is that real impact? Is that really something that's going to change the world? The code's probably much more likely to go and change the world or change the decision. So, or it could be equal. It doesn't have to be better or worse. And so I think that's important. That's important to kind of get the message across through the Academy of Science, what actually is defined as impact and what are other ways of defining impact rather than just, your H-index. And the other thing that I did pick up just out of the things that you're just saying is there is always this question about nature or nurture, right? I don't want to get into the debate, but there's plenty of ecologists here, so I want to try and maybe get on to that. So I once thought I should write a paper about track records of different researchers, leading researchers, and kind of tracking what actually their PhD environment was like, and whether they were part of a bigger group that had, several people working together, or whether they were supervised somewhere on a small university by a single professor, and how much influence you're talking about your resources, how much influence the actual environment is that you have as an early career researcher, no matter how smart you are in terms of achieving what you actually, or what you're going to achieve in the future. That's not to discourage anyone who's really smart and works individually with someone, but that's just trying to think there is an influence of that.
Hi, Daniel, UNSW. I'm an MCR. I was an ECR. We need to find ways as infrastructure groups to put our infrastructure under the noses of the ECRs and make it really easy for them to pick up and use. They're often more, at least in biology, they're often more skilled and able to use the infrastructure and have the technical skills than their supervisors did. And so one of my worries is that the supervisors don't use these infrastructure because they're not really, coders or whatever. And so their students are guided by what they use. And students also, just seconding the impact of code, it'd be great if there was places that we get our students to post worked examples of code so other students can use that, and skills transfer sort of workshops. They love that sort of stuff and they find it. And having on your infrastructure websites, code blogs or posted examples, and encouraging ECRs to post their code there as well can be something which they really helps break down that divide between what the students would benefit from and maybe the skills that supervisors are able to provide.
Yeah, it's a really great point. I have this thing about training. I find training really interesting in its own right. So difficult, to put together, but so interesting because it focuses everyone on an output, and putting that material together in front of other people, it's instant feedback and an instant sort of gratification. It'd be interesting if we got into the train-the-trainer mode where we're using our ECRs as the trainers as well, because then you're sort of uplifting of something that's relevant and gets a bit more community involvement rather than just the resident staff, as it were, trying to do things as well. But look, it's a great point, and I know many of the infrastructures are trying to do that, and clearly that's a good pathway. Sorry, I was talking a bit much there. Yeah.
I'm another MCR who just over my ECR last year. Just a comment about the gap between the digital and domain. So I just want to suggest, I don't know where this is going forward, but if we decided to do a project to integrate data between spheres and try to keep the digital capability from the early stage of the project, and just to ensure that it's not like where normally people finish the project and then give, okay, you create this, published it, but it's not collected or processed in a way it can be shared to other users. So just think about like including the digital capability from the early discussions, so that we can ensure that whichever data we collect or process, that can be reusable for both humans and machines as well. Yeah.
Kimberly down over here first.
Okay.
Hi, yes, so I'm classify myself as a mid-career now, but one of the things I did even back when I was a master's student was to create a personal, code repository. At that time, I think it was SourceForge, but it's since migrated to GitHub. I was just wondering, a show of hands, how many people in this room have a personal GitHub repository for all of their code snippets? Yeah, it's a good idea, because that way you can take your code with you when you migrate from one organization to another, and you have your legacy of code which you maintain as you go through your career.
Yeah, I think in terms of ECRs and what we need, it's also support for data wrangling. So dealing with particularly large data sets. So for example, global data sets provided by NASA or, by ESA. I would hate to think about how many copies of these data sets are on NCI, and perhaps suggest even just aiming for a central place on NCI that is a home within this home folder that anyone can access. I know I would be lost without the work that Mike Sumner and Ben Raymond have done at the Antarctic Division, which is building software to enable me to just say, I want this data from this position at this time, from this particular global data set, and, snap my fingers, I have it. Like, I think translating that model into, something that can be used by ecologists and geologists and atmospheric scientists to minimize, having to download, all of the data onto your local computer. I think that's a really, really good opportunity to support ECRs.
A couple more hands.
I just wanted to throw in, there's a global open source community built resource called Software Carpentry, and it targets the 4 themes of automation, which is using the shell, using structured query language or SQL, using programming, and it's supposed to be language agnostic, but it's you pick R or Python, and source control, which is Git as mentioned. So it's a really good global thing to get behind and use and promote.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to suggest that perhaps as an outfall of this meeting, we call for some volunteers to specify, or for the group actually to specify some high-level topics that we could research and focus hack weeks or hack groups on it. So NASA is doing that. If they have a new satellite data set, actually they sponsor a hack week, and the bonus was that we could participate from Australia on Zoom during the COVID years. And there's actually a lot of really, really good science, cross-disciplinary, that has come from it and ended up in publications, in creating new data sets that the people that working on the satellite data in the first instance didn't even conceive. So I think that's something that's really tangible, and that should probably involve people from different spheres here. So we have topics that are at the interface, and we can come up with new concepts, but also should be something where we all buy in. So not only the ECRs and the MCRs, but also those ones that are a bit more on crutches with their data and software skills, and it's really invaluable. So I had someone starting 2 years ago, and on his first day, he had a meeting at 10 o'clock with me in the office, and at 2 a.m. we joined for the whole week till midday the NASA crowd and other students and ECRs across the planet, and it's an invaluable group we still work with and publish papers.
A couple more hands.
In regards to the hackathons, I mean, Australia has a strong tradition of holding hackathons, and I know that they've also had some specifically looking at using government data. Now, one of the options that can be done is that they take sponsors and you can set up prizes, and one option would be to say, you normally beforehand, you would publish a directory of available data sets and say, these are data sets that are available, encourage people to ask to use, and then you set up some challenges, and a challenge could be an Earth Integrate challenge. So take data from the following columns, sort of like the Chinese menu, take one from column A, B, C, and then you have to solve some sort of science problem. This would force people or encourage people to come up with clever ways of combining Earth and environmental data to solve some real problems. There would be a judging panel that would sort of look at that, and then there also could be lessons learned in regards to what were the problems in using other people's data. Was there something in the data that could have been structured differently to facilitate this kind of thing? It doesn't necessarily solve our research problems, but it does help us to communicate our data, encourage people to use it, transdisciplinary, and also to look at how people access data.
I wanted to pick up on the earlier comment on the capacity building activity and the mention of the carpentries. I very briefly mentioned on one of my slides the CoData RDA schools of research data science. When we put together the curriculum for that, the idea is it's a 2-week intensive course, but it could be split over a longer period of shorter sessions. But we took what the carpentries were doing, we liked their pedagogy, we liked their content, but we felt that it was necessary to add a number of additional units. So that's what we came up with in that curriculum. I'd really love to see that, and I think on one level it's been very successful, on another level it has failed sufficiently to expand on the original networked model. And I'd really like to give that another try to explore whether we can do that again here in Australia and elsewhere, and I think sometimes with a more domain-specific twist to it. It was designed to be domain neutral. It was designed to be a set of core skills that all researchers at an early stage of their career need in terms of looking after their data and analyzing their data. It's very broad but shallow, but I think it's a good starting place, and I think with some domain-specific examples from earth sciences, it could be a model that's worth looking at.
I want to come back to David Lisinski's suggestion about the hackathons, and I think that's a great opportunity. I've been involved in several GovHacks as a mentor, but what we found was even though CSIRO sponsors GovHack, it is very difficult to get people to use CSIRO data because they're not as accessible as many of the public data sets in terms of understanding what they are. Population data, urban data, those common government data sets are more intuitively understandable. So one thing that we tried a couple of years ago was we ran a science hack, where we then, as a rule, it has to be a science topic. You get an extra prize for using NCRIS data, and you get another extra prize if you use NCRIS infrastructure, particularly Nectar. And that actually worked very well. There were other reasons why we didn't repeat that, but it's something to consider whether it's worthwhile to have an NCRIS hackathon or whether NCRIS should sponsor a prize in GovHack that stipulates that you have to use NCRIS data and NCRIS infrastructure.
Oh, Sarah.
Yeah, so one of the things that we discussed in the group that I was, I guess, conveying, was that perhaps we can do a case study where we showcase how we integrate the different spheres. So what if we kill two birds with one stone and then have a hackathon where we focus on a scientific problem using the data and workflows that are already available through NCI or any of the NCRIS organizations, and then also write a high-impact paper that will help boost the careers of ECRs. And we could do like an open call, right? So like I guess like the International Ocean Discovery Program does, that there is a proposal on a given topic, and then you do an open call for the expertise that you want that spans all of the spheres. And then yeah, you get together, do like a two-stage process. First the hackathon and then the paper writing.
Good. Okay. I don't see any more hands up at the moment. So there was a really good conversation there. I hesitate to say because there's no answer. Is there any WHS, not WHS, HR people in the room who are going to solve problems for us that would like to speak? No? Okay. I was thinking about the work from home situation and the advantages that COVID actually brought as well for not moving people around all of the time, particularly if you're on short-term contracts and whatever, that you can do things remotely. Maybe that would be a strange conversation, but maybe that's one that we could have over a beer later if people are interested in that topic. But just to move on a bit, we had several leads of the various NCRIS organisations, and we meet actually quite regularly for this these set of spheres, and we've all got our own sort of pathways and of taking this feedback and where we would like to enrich, I guess, our NCRIS infrastructures and the cross NCRIS infrastructures. And I thought that I might just, I'll run around to the room for the various leads to give any thoughts they had of next steps from their point of view, any reflections or questions they might like to raise for the group. So I'll start with Tim, just because he's closest.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I put Ben on the spot in a meeting the other day by handing the microphone to him first without prior warning, so he's getting me back. Well, look, in terms of next steps, we've mentioned that we want to create an artifact of some kind from this meeting, and we want all of your input into that. And Andy and I were just discussing over afternoon tea what that looks like, because we'd put a lot of thought into the conference and trying to get the right people here and trying to get the discussion flowing. But I guess we hadn't really given an enormous amount of thought to the strategy around that document and what it should be. So I'm interested in getting feedback from anyone here on how we can have the most impact with that artifact, that thing that we create. Should it be like a strategy document that we're using to try to influence government, influence spending, influence the community? Or is it better to create some of these sort of common values, common language, documents that we've talked about that allow us to come together around that and use it as a rallying cry or something that we can all agree on and use as a community. And maybe that will have more impact with government anyway if we come together around this thing. So I don't know the answer. I don't know if Andy knows the answer. I'll let him speak for himself. But we would really like any suggestions that you have about how we can do that. Irrespective, we're going to create something. We're going to be reaching out to all of you. The immediate next step is for us to try to pull stuff together from this, and we will circulate it to you in some format for comment and things. So expect to hear from us. The other thing is anybody who's going to eResearch, we've also got a BOF at eResearch around Integrated Earth, and the intention really is to just give some feedback on where we landed, so a bit of a summary, but to have a conversation with the people in that forum as well, which may be a different community. But any of you who are here who think of something that you wanted to raise and you didn't have an opportunity to, come along to eResearch BOF and share with us again. We can find another room to talk in.
And also visit that report in the Google Drive, the Google Sheet. So that'll be open, and I'll communicate with those who are kind of engaging with that as well.
I'm allergic to dust. And so what I would not like to see out of this is us to prepare a whole lot of documents, whether they're virtual or printed, and have them gather dust. And so my ambition is to see early activity out of this meeting so that we do progress. It's really urgent. It's really important that we keep moving, we keep the momentum going. We have several opportunities. One of the things I heard today was the need for a shared vocabulary. When Turn started, we were faced with many vocabularies because in the land ecosystem area we have contributions from geologists and zoologists and botanists and chemists and physicists, and hey, I could go on. It's a long alphabet of names. And there was no shared vocabulary. We didn't have a chance to even commence working on standardised protocols, standardised measures and things like that to monitor the environment until we actually came up with a way of discussing it and sharing a vocabulary. I think we have within our cluster of NCRIS groups that are related to this, the ability to set the task of developing a shared vocabulary. I'm looking at those from NCRIS. Do we agree? Yes. I think we should put a timeline on working on that. It took us years, didn't it, Guru, wherever you are, to do the common vocabulary that now relates to Turn, and good shout out to Guru for driving that. I want to see that. The second thing I want to see is us taking up the Department of Education's invitation after they were here on the first morning of this session. They got very excited and they want a briefing as soon as we can give them on what we did here. So the organising committee needs to put a summary paper together and take that to the Department of Education, because there are some funding rounds coming up, 2024, 2026, that relate to the roadmap that was published, that was called the 2021 National Research Infrastructure Roadmap, but it wasn't published until a little later, and they're still to give out all the funding related to it. But we do have opportunities to progress in this integrated way into the next rounds of funding for step change. That's what they're calling this whole roadmap that goes through into 2028. So we've been also asked to shake the dust off a scoping study that was done a couple of years ago that was called the National Environmental Prediction System. And I've heard so much here today and yesterday about the models, digital twins, whatever we're going to call them, that we need to have some new types of infrastructure to allow us to take and integrate and put on, you know, lay out the types of models. Andy Hogg knows so much more about this than me. But I get the idea that if you want to take a hydrology model and you want to put it together with a land surface model and you want to put it together with a vegetation cover model, etc., it's not simple, and you do need specialist research infrastructure to be able to do that in order to then take the next step of doing simulations and predictions. So we've also been asked to refresh that scoping study because the government is scoping out a national data research infrastructure. And so one of the outcomes of this is to have a look at all of the notes and PowerPoints and everything and collate as much as we can that would support the need that you have for additional research infrastructure support to allow you to work together. And just walking around as a rover into your rooms, there were so many great ideas, and I kept thinking, but we don't have a capacity to deliver on those yet. So we need to deliver on those. Is that enough, Beck? Can I hand it on? Yep.
Okay, well, again, I've got the microphone, so I may as well say something. So just to pick up on Tim's point about what comes out of this, I think that the sort of options we were discussing is something that's more community oriented or something that's more funding oriented. And I was making the case that I think we should probably aim for the community first rather than going straight for the funding. And in a sense, maybe that's the best way in any case to make use of funding if it comes around. And so I guess something that focuses more on the community will look at the current snapshot of maybe the maturity of different spheres and the practices within different spheres and how we can bring that together. And so that's what I think could come out of this. I'll say one more thing, which is to pick up on Beryl's point. So yesterday we did talk a little bit about models and digital twins, and today we talked a bit more about data and integration. And to some extent, I think that models can help us with that data integration problem because being bits of software, they're maybe less flexible than humans are, and everything needs to be in a form that models can read. And so maybe if we think about that as an integrator, that might be useful. Of course, Access as a software is actually, in its fullest form, is an Earth system model. And in an Earth system model, you actually have pretty much all the spheres. You have sea ice and perhaps land ice based models coupled to the ocean, coupled to the atmosphere, coupled to biogeochemistry and coupled to atmospheric chemistry. And in fact, the only inputs you need to this whole model, you don't even need to put in any data. The only inputs you need is the incoming solar radiation and maybe to know where the continents are. And then it forms a self-running system all of its own. So that is a form of integration, and I think we can maybe leverage that if we can. So I might leave you with that thought.
Good. Might go to Leslie if she's still awake after travel.
We should have got Ben to do the running yesterday.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and I'd like to have a special shout out to all the ECRs and for you forming your little forums and presenting. It was we gave you the opportunity to present and you did a brilliant job. There's rumours around I've heard this afternoon about are we going to run another one? But yeah, it has been an incredible opportunity to get everyone together, but at every career level. Something that I discussed with Cass, we did try hard to get an Indigenous presence at this meeting so they could have their say. And unfortunately, this is something I'm aware of, there aren't all that many Indigenous researchers in the earth and environmental sciences, or if they are there, they don't choose to not identify. But it's interesting because Cass said there's a lot in health and other areas. And if this is something we're talking about on country, is this something, as part of this, we should maybe through the Academy, through their ECR forum, just try and see whether there are Indigenous researchers in all these spheres we've been talking about, and if not, ask the question why. I hear what Andy said about let's have something and write it up for the community, but I also do feel we need to get something really firm and start shouting now, which is why we've got your e-research ECRs here, because as Beryl said, we're operating on infrastructures that were started as part of conferences and talks and rounds like this 30 years ago. So I don't want to lose the objective, which was of the original conference, because we've just gone through the last roadmap activity to try and start to get the community together. And we used to call it the top drawer, you know, you have something in your top drawer, so that when suddenly something comes on the horizon, you've got concrete evidence that we had a wonderful community come together on the 12th and 13th of September in 2023 to progress this combined thinking and prioritisation across all spheres.
Good. I think I've got around to the room of the leaders who are left. Rosie's not here, and she was one of the leaders. So I thought that the next thing before we really wrap up is that I asked Simon if he could give his reflections. I know he's only been here for one day, but he's heard a lot, and I just wouldn't mind to get a final comment from Simon.
Face everyone rather than twisting my neck. I really like the comment of being allergic to dust. I'm allergic to dust. I started off my career studying 16th and 17th century French history, and halfway through my doctorate, an occupational therapist advised me, well, can you not change period? Could you not study something more recent, which, as if you're halfway through a doctorate, isn't great advice. But I would really like to see the dust not settle on this event. I was very keen to be involved because I think it's a great set of questions and a great set of challenges. So I applaud the organisers for that, and I think it's a really good idea. So how do you stop the dust settling on such an endeavour? I mean, it's easy to say another conference. I think an ECR event is a great idea, but perhaps another event of a different type as well. There have been some very good discussions. How do you turn discussions into action? Perhaps something concrete and practical, like a hackathon or a bring your own data exercise. Perhaps something very specific in terms of, okay, how would we, for a given research question, integrate and combine data across the various research infrastructures represented as a 2-3 day workshop where people get directly involved, down and dirty if you like, with the data and the metadata. I also think that it's always easier to take things forward. Of course, you need to have the will, and the will is represented or it's expressed if you can get the various infrastructures to contribute staff time to something. But it's even better if there's a research project and funding for it. It would be very easy, I'm sure, to identify a set of concrete research questions which rely directly on integrated data working across the research infrastructures represented here. And I don't know who the funder of such an activity, an additional activity would be, but I think some lobbying and some discussion and some representation of how useful that would be could be made. There is a really good example of that sort of activity that I'm aware of. For the last 3 years, I've been involved on a selection panel for a thing called the Helmholtz Metadata Cooperation. And some of you may have heard of that. Helmholtz is a German research association. It's an infrastructure and a set of research institutes that works in very similar fields to those, largely overlapping fields to those represented here. For the last 3 years, they've had this initiative, the Helmholtz Metadata Cooperation. It's got, broadly speaking, 2 arms to it. One is a centralized set of activities to create recommendations and policies and to implement those across the various institutes. And the other is a set of projects. And I've been on the selection panel for the latter, where the projects require joint proposals by at least 2 Helmholtz institutes to collaborate on metadata enhancement, creation, or the development of technologies to improve the way that metadata is created and to implement things like FAIR, things like the idea of a fair digital object, etc., etc. I have felt that that's been one of the most valuable things that I've been involved with as sort of on a voluntary basis or giving time. I think it's been really interesting, and I would recommend that approach again to Australian funders, but also as a way of collaborating across the research infrastructures that are represented here. And I suppose the last thing that I'd like to say is that I've been really quite excited and heartened by the number of organizations that have mentioned that they've already explored fair implementation profiles. Perhaps that could be a focus as well. And so I'd reiterate my invitation to collaborate on fair implementation profiles, activities, and perhaps on kicking the tires of the cross-domain interoperability framework and seeing whether that works for the earth sciences and whether we can collaborate on an expanded World Fair initiative. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll second that. I feel that it's a really great opportunity for us to expand on the World Fair work. So it's a large resource, and we've been really privileged to be able to have a window into it. And if we could bring that home for everyone else, I think it'd be great. Thanks, Simon.
All right, so we're getting dangerously close to beer o'clock or flight time for people. I thought we might just do the quick wrap up now for the session and then hand back to Tim as our main representative.
I don't know about that. I just get to thank people, really. So I'm going to start by thanking everybody in the room and all of those who have already left, because it has been a really, really fantastic meeting. And that's down to the input from all of you. So thank you all for being involved and coming with an open mind to a slightly different format to what we're used to, and for sharing your thoughts, and hopefully for staying engaged in the conversation as we go forwards. I would like to thank all of the people that were on the organising committee with me, and all of the people that helped out. And I'm probably going to forget people, so I've got a bit of a list here, but in particular Jaden, who, I don't know where Jaden's gone, he's up the back, who managed with aplomb the stuff that's been done around here. Nico, who's been up there taking photographs and filming us for the last few days. Mark, who's in the audience somewhere with a microphone in his hand, I think. The Ozscope team who helped out as well. So Joe and Rebecca and Min, and Tanya, who did all the finance for this, who's probably not even in here to hear us thank her. She's still probably out on the front desk. And Adam from NCI, who's helped out a lot, Adele from ARDC, and everybody else who was on the committee. So we've already had our opportunity to speak. And I think probably most importantly, I want to thank the person who many years ago was doing geochemistry on granites in the Snowy Mountains, and she was sticking all of her data into a spreadsheet, and she realized that nobody could get hold of it, and she embarked on this journey, which has kind of resulted in us all being here today. So Leslie was the brains behind this. And I've got a little bunch of flowers to thank you, Leslie, because really it was her pushing that got us here and her brains that got us here.
I don't really want to say anything other than thank you, ECRs, and yeah, it's just been a fantastic effort. Sort of like everything we've been working to all these years is, I think, finally going to happen. I never thought it would.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all next time.